Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for coming out this evening. It's good to see so many of you here. I've just completed writing a book. It's something which I've had in me for some time, but I've just been too busy to do anything about it until recently. But I finally managed to get a number of talks which I've given over the years in various lodges in New York and around the country and abroad as well. The book itself actually covers quite a broad spectrum of things. It's available on Amazon, which means that the general public can read it as well. I'm always very careful to make sure that what I put is obviously not what we determine as Masonic secrets, but I think nowadays anyone going onto the internet has probably realized there are very few left, in the sense of, I think everyone who cares hard enough to search can even find our passwords, funny handshakes and everything else. There's very little left. But the main purpose of the book was to try and address what I was beginning to see as a bit of a disconnect. I think over the last several years we've seen a very, very rapid rise of membership in Masonry across the country, at least, and abroad, of younger people who are beginning to be led into Masonry and start to want to see if there's something in Masonry which speaks to them, which they're not finding in other institutions. I'll give you one example. Some years ago, somebody who was actually joining our lodge, St. John's, I found myself actually sort of chatting with him and asking him what he was trying to find in Masonry. And it was a very interesting conversation, because he was saying, I was saying, well, do you consider yourself religious? He said, yes, I go to church every Sunday, and I'm very active in my parish life. In fact, I went to college with the priest. So I said, so you're getting a lot of spiritual fulfillment for that. What do you think you're going to get out of Masonry, which is sort of different? We're not a church, but if you're looking for spirituality, what do you think you're going to get from us? And I found his reply very interesting. He said, well, Jim, the priest, and I are very, very close friends, but one thing I find very hard to handle is once a week he takes a short journey up some winding stairs into this thing called a pulpit. And when he starts to speak, I'm not allowed to question anything he says. I have to take absolutely everything he says as dogmatic fact. And I really have a problem with that, because I believe God gave me a brain and free will in order to exercise it. And I'm hoping in your fraternity I'm going to be afforded the right and the privilege of sitting with like-minded people and openly discussing issues, which I can't even do with my best friend from college when he's in priest mode, basically. And I thought that was a rather interesting way of putting it. Now, as we know, over the last several years, we've had endless Dan Brown, national treasure movers and things. And one of the ironies that's happened is that the younger people who are getting interested in Masonry tend to then go onto the internet, Google various subjects, and quite often they're actually joining Freemasonry with more knowledge than most of its incumbent members. Now, that's where sometimes the disconnect occurs, because if people join a lodge which is really welcoming, understanding of what they're looking for, and will either provide the education they're so keen to find, or at least be able to point them in the right direction, then everything goes fine. But the problem is the person who joins a lodge which really is interested in very little else than chicken dinners, raising money for charity, etc., very worthy causes of themselves. But the problem there, of course, is that the person's not getting that fulfillment which they expected to find in Freemasonry. So part of what I've been trying to do with my book is show that it is worth looking around within Masonry, because you will find things there. One thing which was very popular in Grand Lodges 5-10 years ago was proudly announcing the thing about Masonry is there are no secrets in Masonry. And about 12 years ago, I was actually at the Grand Lodge of New Jersey at their dinner, and I'd been invited to speak, and I said, basically, I hope you don't throw me out after I say this, but I've just heard many of the great and the good say there are no secrets in Freemasonry. Well, I have to ask you a question. If you've been in Masonry for 25 years or plus, what on earth have you been doing? Now, it's an interesting fact that so many people can kind of coast through Masonry without realizing the incredible depth of experiences and learning you can actually find from the various rituals and the teachings which we've had, which go back, of course, at least 300 years, if not further. So the idea behind the book was to try and reach out to those younger Masons who simply aren't finding the education which they're expecting in their immediate circumstance or their immediate lodge, and saying, no, it exists, just cast your net a little wider. Now, coming down from that, I'll just also mention, before I go into the chapter I've chosen, to say that, again, it was mentioned I'm a past master of St John's Lodge number 1. I'll just share with you very quickly, because it seems to be sort of appropriate given what we're going through as a country at the moment. So I'm actually writing a book at the moment on the George Washington inaugural Bible. I've been traveling with it for over 20 years around the various states. I've learned a lot about it myself. I've had a lot of experiences with it, and I thought it was time to actually set these down. There was some person said, please write down what you've just told us before you end up in a plane crash or something, and it'll be too late to find out about these things. Okay, thank you for the push. So I'm going to try and put together a book, and working closely with Morgan as well, trying to explain what is a Bible, where does it come from, who decided what books should be in it, why is the Protestant one different, what effect did the advent of the printing press have on the circulations of the Bibles? When did it start to be translated into the vernacular? Why did King James I decide he needed to retranslate a book which already existed in several English translations? How did he make royalties out of selling the books? How did one of those copies come to St John's Lodge? How did it end up under the hand of George Washington? And then ending the book by looking at what's happened with the Bible since, and also some of my anecdotes over the last 20 years. Believe me, if it could happen, it has happened with the Bible. Sorry. I mean, just to give you 2 quick examples, we had it on exhibition in Arkansas in Little Rock about 4 years ago, and in the Historical Society, and about 2,000 people came through and seen, including Beebe, the governor, and his wife, etc. It was a very joyous occasion, and we were wearing our Masonic regalia, and I'm proud to say of the 2,000 people who came to talk to us and look at the Bible, only one lady told me I was going to burn in hell. That's quite good for Arkansas. Though we had a number of very interesting experiences. I remember there was someone having to call bodyguards when it was an exhibit once in Bayonne, because this woman came in, she claimed she was psychic, and she wanted to touch the page because she was going to channel George Washington. We literally had to have 2 people holding her back to stop her from, as she was trying to reach out to touch the Bible. So yes, if it could happen, we've seen it. Anyway, this evening I chose as the topic the purpose of ritual in Freemasonry. And as you heard from my background, I tried to think how best to look at this. People sort of try and take it from a number of angles. But I found a particular theory by Tom Driver, which is normally applied to religious experiences, which seem to be remarkably appropriate, which is why I asked Morgan to have those handed out. So basically on the second page, we will come to it shortly, but there's the layout of the tension between various aspects of ritual, which I found very, very interesting, want to explore in the context of Freemasonry. So I'd like to start with a little Sufi poem, or Sufi story. Nasruddin, who you see on the front cover, the guy with the enormous turban, he also seems to be depicted like that for some reason, but he's one of the great wise muftis of the Sufi tradition. So Nasruddin used to take his donkey across the frontier every day, loaded with baskets full of straw. Because he freely confessed to being a smuggler, when he came home every night, the frontier guards would search him again and again. They used to strip him, sift the straw, steep it in water, sometimes even burn it. Meanwhile, Nasruddin was becoming more and more wealthy. Then he retired and went to live in another country. And here one of the frontier guards happened to meet him many years later. You can tell me now, Nasruddin, he said, what on earth were you smuggling all that time when we could never catch you out? Donkeys, said Nasruddin. Now, what is Freemasonry for? By what measure of success are we judging ourselves? If the indicators are numbers of members, sums donated to charity, or speed of advancement to Master Masons, then indeed we are achieving all of our goals. But this can be claimed of almost any society, club, fraternity, or union who has members and collects money for charity. Ah, we say, but ours is a fraternity with rituals and education, and this is what makes us unique. If this is so, then we have a problem. If our rituals are so important to us, why do they often become a secondary consideration against the desire to attract large numbers of members? Some have been concerned with quality, and by this they mean the quality of candidates being attracted to the craft. Far fewer seem to be concerned about the quality of the experience we offer these candidates. The quality of our education will be a topic which I cover later on. But for this talk, in Europe, every effort is made to ensure that the rituals are special for the candidate, and only one person or two at the most is advanced through a particular grade at one time. The focus on education is on the meaning of the rituals and their application to daily life. The ritual is everything. It inspires, it educates, and it binds its members together in fraternity. Here I've heard reports of masters, even of lodges meeting at Grand Lodge, who say it'd be much easier to attract new members if only we got rid of those boring rituals. Now, to put this more bluntly, conversations with a number of new members reveals the following telling comments. I joined Freemasonry to learn. I can go to business meetings all day at work. I didn't join Masonry to attend yet more business meetings. I have friends and an active social life. Why do I need more dinners? Steve. We were talking about this earlier. I chose to give to charity, but I didn't join Freemasonry because of its charities. And most tellingly to me, my father joined Freemasonry many years ago in the Caribbean, and the whole family saw the transformation it worked in him. I see nothing or little of that process here. Now, this paper is not an examination of any particular ritual used in Freemasonry. It will use contemporary anthropological theory to try and better understand the purpose of ritual. From this understanding, it's hoped that ritual will be seen to be key and central to Freemasonry, and that if the fraternity is to have any relevance in modern society, it must accept that this truly is its mission statement, and that the time spent in organising mass rallies, charitable donations, and filling the evenings of committee meetings and dinners, while perhaps worthy, is not central to its purpose and function. Now, whatever might be going on in the minds of those who wish to remove rituals from Freemasonry altogether, rituals are far, far more than pretty little plays to be learned by rote and put on for the satisfaction of a group of actors, or an annoyance that gets in the way of charitable works and delicious dinners. Now, in his book Liberating Rites, Tom Driver sees ritual as resulting from the tensions arising from two dimensions. In the first, a performance must balance the modalities of ritual, where efficaciousness is paramount, and theatre, where entertainment is paramount. This is logical, as seeing a play with no teaching is simply that, an evening's entertainment. On the other hand, a ritual which only serves to promote a particular message or state of mind, with no eye to keeping the attention through beauty, pageantry, or spectacle, will soon lose our attention. The second dimension is that of confession versus ethical, or the personal aspect versus the public aspect. Again, this makes sense, since all ritual is a balance between what we either do in private or within ourselves, and what we carry of what we have learned into public life, be it to improve ourselves, to change the world, or even just to perform little acts of kindness. This theory, although initially developed for religion, is certainly applicable to Masonry. No, I'm not implying that Masonic ritual is religious. I am categorically stating that much of religion is ritual, in that it uses symbols, repetitive action, separation of space and time to convey emotional states and teachings. The Masonic degrees are an exquisite tension between ritual, theatrical, confessional, and ethical modes. The allegory of meaning is concealed within a formalized method of delivery, which nevertheless is intended to be communicated in a highly absorbing and entertaining environment. The wearing of unusual clothing and being divested of anything which might connect us to the outside world through a careless touch or glance is removed, and the neophyte enters a new dimension outside of time and space. This should mean no clocks, no alarms, no cell phones, and no profane signs of any kind, including the fire exit signs sadly imposed upon us by overly intrusive regulations. In truth, this list should include no artificial candles, for the symbolism of three natural luminaries describing a triangle is very profound and worthy of a paper in itself. And yet we do not intend to bore him to death with dry, dull teachings. We present him with a kaleidoscope of sensations and symbols which he will study with pleasure throughout his Masonic career. The two opposing modes of confession and ethics are also superbly balanced in our inspired rites. The ceremony itself balances the things the candidate must do for himself, including his first spoken words upon entering the lodge, and his obligation both to conceal and to study the teachings he will receive, and those actions which this new community, the parts and characters within this symbolic temple, will do to and for him. So we'll consider three aspects of ritual and relate them to the Masonic experience. Ritual as subversive, ritual as teaching, and ritual as transcendence. So let's begin to consider the subversive aspect of ritual. History has shown us the kings, presidents, and the church alike have been terrified by the power of ritual, and those of Freemasonry in particular. From the Morgan Affair and the papal prescriptions of the 18th and 19th century, through the persecution of Freemasonry under both fascism and communism earlier last century, to the present enforced public declarations of membership by judges and policemen in England under the then Labour government, which is still going on now, Masons have been singled out for attack. Why is this? And why should this be a good thing for Freemasonry? Well, ritual takes us away from society, even if only for a few hours. It allows us, for a period, to overcome social alienation in the famous wearing of white gloves, and affords us an opportunity to talk with intelligent, informed people about the state of our nation, without concern that our words might be carried back to inimical sources by spies, who are, to us, our traditional Karens and eavesdroppers. And this might not seem a big thing to us in the United States, although I guess watch the next few years. But ask a Mason in Spain in the 1930s or occupied France in the 1940s for his opinion, and he will tell you that a poorly chosen candidate meant more than just a disrupted lodge. It probably meant a firing squad. What we stand for is contrary to any society which seeks to control, segregate, repress, or persecute its inhabitants. And sadly, that is the state of affairs in the majority of the countries of this world. Our Masonic meetings allow us to rehearse and to debate teachings from an earlier time, and many books have been written about how these deposits of mystical learning were bought at the price of blood, and are a sacred heritage which it is our duty and our joy to preserve, and in succession to pass on to the next generation. This state of existence beyond the threshold of daily society has been described as liminality, which comes from the Latin limen, which means a threshold. Now, Arnold van Gennep describes these rites as being flanked by preliminal or separation rites and postliminal or reincorporation rites. So having been separated from conventional reality through darkness, enclosure, and androgynous clothing, the candidates, or threshold people, are ambiguous entities which float passively through the liminal rites which take place outside of time and space, before being reintegrated by the postliminal rites to take their place among the new community. Van Gennep describes liminal ritual as being frequently linked to death, to being in the womb, to invisibility, to darkness, to an eclipse of the sun or the moon. I'm sure Masons will recognize many of these allusions. It is hardly surprising, therefore, as Tom Driver suggests, as the powers of nation states have grown in modern times, so has a desire on their part to eliminate as much liminality as possible from ritual performance, because liminality can lead to a weakening of state control over people's ideas and emotions and behavior. He continues, much goes on in rituals that would not be tolerated at other times. Hand clapping, rhapsodic speech, cross-dressing, speech song recitations, direct address to invisible beings, public exchanges of affection, mystical union with other participants. The liminality of rituals mean that they are informed on the one hand by a greater than usual sense of order, and on the other by a heightened sense of freedom and possibility. So ritual, and especially Masonic ritual, is a process which separates the man from normal society and places him in a position in which to analyze that society with the symbolic tools he is given. And if he finds society wanting in its stand on charity, fraternity, rights, God and nature, empowers him to go out into that society in order to change it for the better. No wonder Masons are seen as subversive. And here lies the paradox. According to Driver, ritual stands in contradiction to society while at the same time being a part of it. Our ritual empowers us to live, act and work within society, but empowers us with the mission to change it for the better. This empowerment, given through the liminal process of ritual, internalizes this drive to a far greater extent than the debating society or business meeting possibly could. For through internalizing the symbols, we become those symbols ourselves, symbols of what man can achieve by right thinking, right acting and right saying. We have only to look at George Washington to see those great Masonic symbols in action. Now let us consider ritual as teaching. Our rituals are full of symbolic teachings. We do not lay out the secrets of our deposit like pearls before swine. We protect them even from the casual Mason. For only those who are prepared to work at understanding the meaning behind the parables and allegories is truly worthy of that deposit. Ritual allows the deposit of knowledge to be passed from one generation to another unchanged, so that if one generation fails to understand the true pearls therein contained, the message is transmitted intact to the next generation, when someone might then discern the wisdom within. Woe betide the ignorant keeper of the work or custodian of the work who decides to modernize, abbreviate, or amend the ritual. Anyone here in the Scottish Rite? He commits a capital offence in the eyes of the early members who placed this sacred deposit in the cure of our mystery school. As an aside, I remember a story, I think it was a Greek myth. Maybe afterwards anyone who knows the story can tell me, sort of give me the facts of it, because I tried looking it up in Google and it failed me for once. But it was a story I heard in my early schooling of an old man who appears before a great king carrying 12 books. When the king asks what he has in those books, the old man says, "Sire, they contain all the wisdom of mankind." "How much will you sell them to me for?" the king asks him. "For half your kingdom," replies the old man. The king laughs and said this, of course, is a ludicrous price. So the old man asked for a brazier. Intrigued, the king, as a servant, fetch a lit brazier. The old man solemnly places 6 of the books in the brazier and burns them, to the horror of the king. Then the old man asked the king if he would like to buy the remaining 6 books. Shrewdly, for he is a wise king, the king asks how much. "Half your kingdom," the old man replies. The king shakes his head. Solemnly, the old man places another 3 books in the brazier and they burn to dust. The king promptly purchases the remaining 3 for half his kingdom. Now let not our great deposit be squandered in this manner. For if a generation destroys some of the great symbolism in the name of progress or expediency, the next generation often cannot go back to the dead and ask them what it meant. And there's a second reason we communicate our teachings through the use of symbols. While allegories and parables tell a story, it is only through the use of symbols that we truly become a universal brotherhood. Language divides us, but ritual reassembles us. Roy Rappaport wrote, "The distinctions of language cut the world into bits, into categories, classes, oppositions, and contrasts. It is in the nature of language to search out all the differences and to turn them into distinctions, which then provide bases for boundaries and barriers." And further he says, "It is in the nature of ritual to unite or reunite the psychic, social, natural, and cosmic orders which language and the exigencies of life pull apart. It is of importance in this regard that representation and ritual are often multimodal, employing at one and the same time words, music, noise, odors, objects, and substances. A ritual can act like a mantra or meditational exercise. It is not to be seen once and forgotten. It is to be seen again and again, whereby different messages and nuances are perceived and understood. In Masonry, this effect is enhanced considerably through the possibility of seeing the ritual through the eyes of different participants, as the brother takes first one, then another part in the mysteries as he progresses through the lodge. This lifetime of learning opens like a rose to reveal the beauty within to the intelligent and seeking eye. Sadly, this value breaks down when, as Driver writes, people do not see the necessary correspondence between what they signify and the reality of the community in the world. Religion makes the same complaint. There's little value in going to pray than coming back into the world unchanged and continuing the same negative behavior as before. To return to Driver's module, the confessional mode should drive us towards the ethical mode. Charity, right thinking, right acting, and right saying. While these are not primary concerns of Masonry and its rituals, they are a visible and confirming sign that the ritual has achieved success in communicating its lessons, that they have not fallen on stony ground, but indeed have been internalized and become an unconscious part of the brothers' daily behavior. For this is when learning transforms us. And finally on this, one point which will be a little vexatious to the current American Masonic climate, but one which I feel morally obliged to raise. Now, the younger ones of you here will not have had to go through this indignity, but mass initiation, one-day classes, which we did once in 2003, mercifully never to be repeated in this state. I cannot believe it is efficacious. It is critical that the neophyte undergoes the experience of transformation or liminalization himself. While the side degrees are often run as theatrical experiences in which candidates watch the drama unfold by means of a proxy or exemplar, the first 3 degrees of the Holy Saint John are too important to be conferred en masse. If I might give an extreme example, it's rather like a row of Jewish babies at a bris watching one of them being circumcised on their behalf. Or a group of confirmants watching diocesan bishop laying his hands on one exemplar for the class. How about those to be initiated in the mysteries of Eleusis, sitting outside the cave and being given a brief summary of what's going on to the one allowed into the cave to undergo the rites? Or one which has been seriously debated, the efficacy of a papal blessing when watched on television. Ludicrous examples, certainly, but do they apply to Masonic initiation as well? I do believe so. And finally, we'll look at rituals being transformational. Ritual can transform us in 2 ways. Internally, in the way we learn to think and perceive things in a new way, and externally, in making us part of a new community. The external community has been called a number of things. It's not strictly a club or even a fraternity, for undergoing a transforming ritual is far more powerful than going out for a few drinks or sharing together in some community project. In mystical groups, the term often applied is egregore, or the collective thoughts and inspiration of previous generations. If that's a little too esoteric for some, the term used by Driver is communitas, which he defines as a spirit of unity and mutual belonging not existing outside of ritual. In other words, charitable giving, a dinner, business meetings or coach trip do not confer this common bond which transcends lodge and even continent. For any well-travelled Mason will tell you that the welcome received from those who share this sense of communitas is as warm and sincere in a lodge in New York as in Namibia. Those who hold out the hand of brotherhood are not doing so on the strength of a dues card or some common set of passwords and grips. They're doing it out of a sense of common experience. This transformation takes place at a number of levels. There is nothing which can describe the excitement and joy of making that link between symbol and the external world, which opens up a whole new area of understanding to the perceptive Mason. That momentous instant when the interior and exterior worlds link, and the Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, is once more realized. In turn, this realization or understanding leads the experiencer to enact that part of the ritual with a greater understanding, with the result that those who also understand that particular teaching will immediately realize that this Mason too has the key to its interpretation, while those still seeking its inner meaning will marvel at the depth of feeling and command that Mason brings to the role. I like to give readers a means to experience what I say on a practical level, and this is no exception. One means of opening up one's uncritical mind to the power of the symbols which surround us in our ritual is through using what is called creative visualization, When the reader next takes part either in a Masonic ritual or any other kind of ritual, I'd ask them to spend a few moments before just sitting quietly in a place or their station where their office is, preferably with their eyes closed, and imagine themselves transported back to the historic time in which the ritual is set. For us, of course, that is around the time of King Solomon's Temple. Now, while any officer and anybody can do this exercise, let us just use an example of the presiding officer of a Blue Lodge. Now, while I appreciate the non-Masons here, I will divulge nothing which is not freely available on the internet, and it's been long established that it is our words and means of recognition which are private to us, and not the teachings or the ritual itself, which are freely available. So let the presiding officer imagine with all his power of concentration that he is indeed King Solomon. He should feel the crown upon his head and its weight, the top hat being magically transformed into its prototype, the rich red and gold robes enfolding his body, the scepter of power, for us the gavel, lying to his right, the sensation of the opulent throne pressing against his body. Hear the muffled sound of the workmen and their subdued cries all around this great building site, for remember, no sound of metal was to be heard. Feel the heat of the noonday sun beating down, the acrid drying sand assaulting the nostrils. Now the eyes are opened, and I guarantee you the words uttered by this new King Solomon will thrill the most experienced ritualist in the room. At the obligation, he will step down from his throne, leaving the triple dais, and walking across the great flagstones of the temple floor, aware of the eyes of all his courtiers upon him. He walks between the pylons, formed by the senior and junior wardens, and enters the holy place to administer the vows to the faithful workmen kneeling in awe and love before him, in the simple white vestments of the apprentice who has earned the great master's approbation. See the members of the living temple arrayed on either side in the shadows, huge and dread as the great statues of the gods in the Egyptian temples, from which this great temple took its design. And then the great king takes his position before the great altar and opens his mouth to speak. As an aside, this method of taking on a formal prototype is often referred to as assuming a god form in many esoteric societies. And indeed, in many cultures, it is an established method of communicating with the higher powers, as we see in the practices of shamans, witch doctors, voodoo priests, and even some of the more rarefied practices of Christianity, especially in the Coptic Church, and even in Catholicism, where the priest in a way takes on the role of Christ in the reenactment of the Last Supper. So to conclude, in order to survive, Freemasonry must be a society which offers more than making as many members as possible, giving more money to charity, and organising yet more committees, dinners, and events, which the same dwindling number of stalwarts doggedly support. To those who say our society would attract far more members if we didn't have degrees, I would say, then what do we have left to offer? Where will we find candidates who do not seek light, and who long for long business meetings, relentless collations, and endless calls for charitable donations? We are a mystery school. Our gentle craft is a place which imparts important and relevant lessons about the nature of our relationship with God, with one another, and with the earth. As with all mystery schools, these lessons are not poured out at the feet of the new student, but are revealed over time to the true seeker of meaning in today's fast and dangerous world. Our message has never been more relevant. It is taught through the allegory and symbolism of ritual. And finally, as I'm sure you've realized, in the Sufi parable which began this paper, the straw which occupied the board guard so completely is all the chaff and secondary attributes of Freemasonry. The pomp, the titles, the dinners, the charities, the meetings, the business, the committees, while buried under all this superficial activity is the true way to wealth of the spirit. The donkeys, under the very noses of the guards, who fail to appreciate their value, represent the ritual. Thank you very much for your attention.